I didn't believe in ghosts until I heard my name whispered from the walls. Tonight, we delve into the heart of Thailand, a land steeped in beauty and ancient lore. It was supposed to be a dream holiday. A young couple eager for adventure booked a charming Airbnb nestled amidst the bustling streets of Chiang Mai. They craved the vibrant culture, the fragrant cuisine, the warmth of the Thai sun. Little did they know, a different kind of warmth awaited them, a darkness that whispered from the shadows. The couple, let's call them Sarah and John, pored over online photos, captivated by the Airbnb's ornate details. The carved wooden furniture, the silk drapes, the antique Buddha statue in the corner. It promised an authentic Thai experience, far from the sterile walls of a hotel chain. Their excitement grew with each passing day. Their bags were packed weeks in advance. They dreamt of saffron sunsets and the scent of jasmine in the air. They yearned for the exotic, the unknown. They were blissfully unaware of the secrets that nestled in the eaves of their chosen haven, unaware of the eyes that watched their every move from the shadows. But the spirits knew, they always know, and they waited. And the moment their plane touched down in Chiang Mai, the air thrummed different, a symphony of unfamiliar scents. Lemongrass, incense, a faint metallic tang filled their senses. The humidity clung to them like a second skin. Stepping out of the airport, the city embraced them in a cacophony of sound. Tuk-tuks sputtered, vendors hawked their wares. The air buzzed with a chaotic energy. Their Airbnb, tucked away in a quieter lane, seemed an oasis of calm. A small courtyard, fragrant with frangipani, led to a heavy wooden door. As the owner, a wizened old woman with eyes that held the wisdom of generations, ushered them in, a shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The air inside felt heavy, still, like the air before a storm. John, ever the pragmatist, dismissed it as jet lag. He marvelled at the intricate carvings on the wall, the antique furniture, the serene Buddha statue draped in marigolds. He unpacked their bags, his excitement bubbling over. Sarah, however, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A presence, unseen, lingered in the corners of the room. It brushed against her skin like cobwebs, sending shivers down her spine. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. As darkness descended, so did the unease. The city's vibrant symphony transformed into a hushed murmur, punctuated by the distant bark of a dog. That night, as Sarah lay awake, listening to John's steady breathing, she heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the corner where the Buddha statue sat. A tapping that seemed to echo the beat of her own quickening heart. The next morning the sun streamed through the ornate window, painting the room in a warm glow. John, ever the optimist, had already ventured out, eager to sample the local street food. Sarah, still feeling the chill of the previous night, lingered in the courtyard, sipping her tea. The air, though humid, felt lighter, as if cleansed by the morning light. The old woman who owned the Airbnb appeared, her face creased with 1,000 smiles. She spoke little English, yet her warmth transcended language barriers. She brought Sarah fresh mango, its sweetness a burst of sunshine on her tongue. She gestured towards the Buddha statue, her voice a low murmur, her words incomprehensible yet soothing. Sarah, despite her unease, felt a connection with the old woman, a sense of comfort. John returned, his face alight with excitement, his hands laden with bags of exotic fruits and steaming bowls of noodles. He regaled Sarah with tales of his morning adventures, his enthusiasm infectious. The previous night's unease faded, replaced by the intoxicating energy of a new place, a new culture. They spent the day exploring bustling markets, their senses overwhelmed by a kaleidoscope of colours, sounds and smells. As evening approached, they found themselves drawn to a small family-run restaurant tucked away in a quiet alley. The air hung heavy with the aroma of spices, the sounds of laughter and conversation spilling out onto the street. It was there, amidst the clanging of woks and the murmur of Thai, that they met him. A young man, his English surprisingly fluent, his eyes filled with a quiet wisdom that belied his years. He introduced himself as Chai, a distant relative of the restaurant owner. As they shared a pot of fragrant jasmine tea, he told them tales of his city, its history woven with myths and legends. John, ever the pragmatist, listened with polite amusement. Sarah, however, found herself drawn to Chai's stories, her intuition whispering that there was more to his words than met the eye. Chai spoke of ancient spirits, guardians of the land, their presence both revered and feared. He spoke of rituals and offerings, of the delicate balance between the human world and the unseen realm. He spoke of places imbued with power, where the veil between worlds thinned, where spirits lingered. His voice, though soft, held a certain weight, his words weaving a tapestry of wonder and trepidation in Sarah's mind. John, noticing the shift in Sarah's demeanour, steered the conversation towards lighter topics, the best street food stalls, the must-see temples. Chai, sensing her unease, smiled enigmatically. "Thailand is a land of many spirits," he said, his eyes twinkling in the dim light. "Some benevolent, some not so much. It is important to be respectful, to tread lightly." His words hung in the air, a chilling reminder that beneath the surface of this vibrant city, something darker lurked. As they left the restaurant, the air felt noticeably cooler. The sky, once ablaze with the colours of sunset, had darkened to a deep indigo, the stars just beginning to prick through the velvet canvas. They made their way back to the Airbnb, their footsteps echoing on the quiet street. John, still buzzing from the day's adventures, chatted animatedly. Sarah, however, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following their every move. Back at the Airbnb, Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. John, still full of energy, suggested a nightcap in the courtyard. As he busied himself with the bottle of Singer beer they'd picked up earlier, Sarah wandered back into the room. She paused, her gaze drawn to the Buddha statue in the corner. It seemed different somehow, more prominent in the dim light. And then she saw it. Draped around the statue's neck, an amulet she hadn't noticed before. It was small, no bigger than her thumb, intricately carved from a dark reddish wood. It depicted a grotesque figure, part human, part animal, its features contorted in a silent scream. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine, a primal fear gripping her heart. She'd seen amulets like this before, in books, in documentaries, amulets believed to contain spirits. "John!" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. He appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, love? You look like you've seen a ghost." She pointed to the amulet, her hand shaking. "That wasn't there before," she whispered, her voice barely audible. John, ever the pragmatist, chuckled. "Of course it was, love. You probably just didn't notice it." But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. He stepped closer, examining the amulet. It was undeniably old, the wood worn smooth with time, the details of the carving both intricate and disturbing. "It's probably just a tourist trinket," he said, trying to sound reassuring, but his voice lacked conviction. The amulet seemed to radiate an energy, a palpable presence that filled the room. The air grew heavy, the silence thick with unspoken fear. That night, sleep evaded Sarah. John, exhausted from the day's adventures, drifted off quickly, his breathing deep and steady. But Sarah lay awake, her senses on high alert. The silence seemed to amplify every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside the window. Her mind raced, replaying Chai's words, her gaze drawn again and again to the grotesque amulet adorning the Buddha statue. The rhythmic tapping from the previous night returned, softer this time, almost imperceptible. It seemed to emanate from the corner where the statue sat, a steady beat that echoed the growing unease in Sarah's chest. She closed her eyes, willing herself to relax, to dismiss it as her imagination. But deep down, a primal fear whispered that something was amiss. She tossed and turned, the sheets tangled around her legs. Just as she felt herself drifting off, a sudden sound jolted her awake. It was a soft thud, like something small and light falling to the floor. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. John slept soundly beside her, oblivious to her fear. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. And that's when she saw it. The amulet, no longer draped around the Buddha's neck, lay on the floor at the foot of the statue. It seemed to gleam in the darkness, its grotesque features even more pronounced in the moonlight. A cold dread washed over her, chilling her to the bone. This was no trinket, this was something more sinister, and it was watching them. John awoke to the fragrant aroma of Thai coffee, the sun already painting the room in hues of gold and ochre. He stretched lazily, a contented sigh escaping his lips. He'd slept soundly, his dreams filled with the vibrant colours and exotic scents of their new surroundings. He glanced over at Sarah, expecting to see her usual bright smile. But the sight that greeted him sent a jolt of concern through him. She sat perched on the edge of the bed, her back ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on the Buddha statue in the corner. Her face, normally so full of life, was pale and drawn, her eyes shadowed with a fear he'd never witnessed before. "Sarah, darling, are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. She seemed to startle at the sound of his voice, as if jarred from a trance. "John," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "something's not right here, something's very wrong." He tried to reassure her, attributing her unease to jet lag and the unfamiliarity of their surroundings. He reminded her of their plans for the day, a visit to the majestic Doi Suthep temple nestled in the mountains, promising breathtaking views and a taste of Thai spirituality. But his words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The fear that had taken root in Sarah's heart overnight had blossomed into a chilling certainty. Something was amiss in this ancient city, something that lurked just beyond the veil of the ordinary. They ventured out into the bustling streets, the sights and sounds of Chiang Mai washing over them like a tidal wave. Yet while John marvelled at the vibrant street life, the intricate architecture of ancient temples, Sarah remained withdrawn, her senses on high alert, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach with every step they took. The city, once a source of excitement and wonder, now felt oppressive, its hidden corners whispering secrets she wasn't meant to know. As they navigated the crowded market, the air thick with the aroma of spices and incense, a glint of gold caught Sarah's eye. It was a small stall, tucked away amidst the vendors selling silks and souvenirs, its shelves overflowing with amulets, talismans, and other objects of spiritual significance. An inexplicable force drew her towards it, a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. John, sensing her unease, gently took her hand. "Are you sure you want to go in there, love?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. She hesitated, torn between her apprehension and a growing compulsion to understand the darkness that seemed to be closing in around them. The stall's owner, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom, greeted them with a toothless grin. He spoke no English, but his gestures were welcoming, his manner strangely calming. Sarah's gaze swept over the array of objects displayed before her, each one imbued with a sense of power, a tangible energy that sent shivers down her spine. There were amulets for protection, for love, for wealth, their intricate carvings depicting deities and mythical creatures, their surfaces worn smooth by the touch of countless hands, seeking solace or guidance. And then she saw it, lying nestled amongst a collection of jade pendants and silver bracelets, an amulet identical to the one she'd found in their Airbnb. The same grotesque figure, part human, part animal, its features frozen in a silent scream, carved from the same dark reddish wood. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly as she felt a wave of icy cold emanate from its surface. It felt strangely familiar, as if she'd held it before, as if it was calling out to her. John, noticing the change in her demeanour, gently pried the amulet from her grasp. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "This amulet," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the cacophony of the market. "It's the same." "It's exactly the same as the one in our room." John frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Are you sure, love? It's probably just a common design." But even as he spoke, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. He'd seen the fear in Sarah's eyes, a fear that ran deeper than any tourist's apprehension of the unknown. They left the stall, their hands empty, but the image of the amulet, its grotesque features etched into Sarah's mind, followed them like a shadow. The encounter had only deepened the mystery, amplifying the sense of unease that clung to them like a shroud. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. But where do you turn when the line between the real and the supernatural begins to blur, when the shadows themselves seem to whisper warnings? As the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the ancient city, they found themselves drawn back to the familiar comfort of the small, family-run restaurant where they'd met Chai. He greeted them with a warm smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his presence strangely reassuring amidst the growing storm of fear and uncertainty. They sat down at their usual table, the aroma of jasmine tea filling their senses, hoping that perhaps he, with his knowledge of Thai law and his connection to the unseen world, could shed some light on the darkness that seemed to be closing in. As they recounted the strange events of the past 24 hours, the discovery of the amulet, the unsettling feeling of being watched, Chai listened intently, his dark eyes never leaving their faces. When they finished, a heavy silence descended upon the table, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of chopsticks and the murmur of conversation from the other diners. John, ever the pragmatist, searched Chai's face for a hint of skepticism, a reassuring dismissal of their fears as mere figments of their imagination. But Chai's expression remained unreadable, a mixture of concern and a deep, knowing sadness. He took a slow sip of his tea, the steam swirling around his face like an ethereal veil, before finally breaking the silence. "The amulet you describe," he began, his voice low and measured, each word carefully chosen. "It is called a Kuman Thong." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling with a primal fear. She'd heard whispers of such things, dark tales whispered in hushed tones, shrouded in superstition and dread. "A Kuman Thong," Chai continued, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the restaurant walls, "is a spirit bound to our world through a powerful ritual. It is said to bring good luck, protection, even wealth to its owner. But," he added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "it is a dangerous thing to possess such power." John, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "You're not seriously suggesting that the amulet in our room is inhabited by some kind of spirit, are you?" he asked, his tone dismissive. But Sarah could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a seed of unease planted by Chai's words, and the undeniable strangeness of their situation. Chai merely smiled sadly, his eyes filled with a wisdom that transcended logic and reason. "Whether you believe or not is of little consequence," he said, his voice laced with a quiet urgency. "What matters is that the Kuman Thong is real, and it is not something to be trifled with. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing Sarah's with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "The spirit feeds on energy," he whispered, his words barely audible above the clatter of the restaurant. "Your fear, your anxiety, it sustains it, makes it stronger." Sarah's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding in her chest. She suddenly understood the growing sense of unease, the feeling of being watched, the oppressive atmosphere that had enveloped her since their arrival. It wasn't just her imagination. Something was feeding on her fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. John remained unconvinced, his rational mind struggling to reconcile with the possibility of the supernatural. But Sarah felt a growing sense of dread, a chilling certainty that Chai's words held a truth that transcended her understanding. The amulet, the eerie feeling of being watched, the inexplicable events that seemed to plague them, it all pointed to a reality she could no longer deny. They left the restaurant, the weight of Chai's words hanging heavy in the air between them. The bustling streets, once a source of fascination, now felt threatening, the shadows deeper, the faces of the passers-by filled with a hidden knowledge that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. John, sensing her growing fear, tried to distract her, suggesting a visit to the night market, promising a feast of street food and a vibrant display of local crafts. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being followed, of unseen eyes watching their every move. The city, once a welcoming embrace, now felt like a cage, its ancient walls closing in, trapping them in a nightmare from which there was no escape. They returned to the Airbnb, their footsteps echoing on the quiet street, each step filled with a growing sense of dread. As they stepped into the courtyard, a wave of suffocating heat washed over them, the air thick with the scent of frangipani and something else, something ancient and unsettling. The old woman who owned the property sat on the veranda, her wrinkled face illuminated by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. Her eyes closed as if in deep meditation. She opened them as they approached, her gaze fixing on Sarah with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. She spoke in rapid Thai, her voice surprisingly strong for one so frail, her words a torrent of sound that seemed to vibrate with an unseen power. John, unable to understand, looked to Sarah for a translation. But she was lost in the depths of the old woman's gaze, her mind reeling with a growing sense of foreboding. The old woman reached out, her hand surprisingly strong as she grasped Sarah's wrist. She pointed a gnarled finger towards the house, her voice rising in a mixture of warning and despair. Then, just as suddenly as she'd spoken, she fell silent, her hand dropping away from Sarah's wrist as if she'd been drained of all energy. John rushed to the old woman's side, his concern overriding his skepticism, but she waved him away, her eyes still fixed on Sarah, a mixture of pity and fear etched on her wrinkled face. They entered the house, the air inside heavy and still, the silence broken only by the sound of their own breathing. John went to switch on the light, but Sarah stopped him, her hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her own heart. "Let's just go." She didn't need to see the amulet to know it was there, waiting for them in the dimly lit room. Its presence permeated the air, a palpable weight that pressed down on them, suffocating them with its malevolent energy. John stared at her, his brow furrowed with concern. He was about to protest, to demand an explanation for her sudden change in demeanour, when he saw it. A flicker of movement in the corner of the room, a fleeting glimpse of something dark and misshapen, disappearing behind the heavy drapes that adorned the windows. He froze, his breath catching in his throat, his rational mind struggling to reconcile with the evidence of his own eyes. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a tangible sense of something ancient and powerful lurking just beyond the veil of their perception. Sarah turned to him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and grim acceptance. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice trembling with urgency he could no longer ignore. "We need to leave right now." And in that moment, as the shadows deepened and the silence of the ancient city pressed in around them, John felt a chill run down his spine, a primal fear he'd never known before. He realized with a sickening certainty that they weren't alone in the house. Something was with them, something dark and hungry, and it had been waiting for them all along. John didn't need any further convincing. The fear in Sarah's eyes, the palpable tension in the air, and the lingering image of the shadowy figure were enough to shatter his skepticism. He grabbed their bags, his movements jerky, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Sarah, her senses on high alert, led the way, her hand reaching for John's, her grip a lifeline in the suffocating darkness. They moved like phantoms through the labyrinthine streets of Chiang Mai, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones, the city holding its breath as if in anticipation of some unseen terror. The humid air clung to them like a shroud, the scent of incense and jasmine replaced by a cloying sweetness that spoke of decay and something far more sinister. Behind them, the silhouette of the Airbnb loomed against the inky sky, its windows dark, its secrets hidden in the shadows. The bustling night markets, once a vibrant tapestry of colours and sounds, were a blur of distorted faces and muffled voices. Sarah's mind raced, replaying Chai's words, each syllable a hammer blow to her sanity. The Kuman Thong, a spirit bound to this world, feeding on their fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her, her legs threatening to buckle beneath her. They stumbled into a small square, the air thick with the scent of exhaust fumes and desperation. A group of tuk-tuk drivers huddled beneath a flickering street lamp, their faces etched with a weariness that transcended the late hour. John, desperation gnawing at his composure, approached them, his words tumbling over each other in a torrent of broken Thai and frantic gestures. One of the drivers, younger than the others, his eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and pity, listened patiently to John's pleas. He glanced at Sarah, her face ashen, her body trembling with exhaustion and terror, and a flicker of understanding crossed his features. He barked a few words to his companions, his tone brooking no argument, and with a screech of tires and a plume of blue smoke, they were whisked away from the suffocating embrace of the old city. The hotel was a stark contrast to the charm and character of the Airbnb. A modern, sterile tower block, its facade illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights, its air-conditioned lobby a bland sanctuary of muted colours, and the faint hum of piped music. To John, it felt like a haven, a fortress against the unseen forces that had pursued them through the darkened streets. To Sarah, it was just another cage, another temporary refuge in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly unpredictable. They booked a room on the highest floor, far from the shadows and whispers of the old city, the anonymity of the keycard and the impersonal efficiency of the receptionist, a thin veneer of comfort. John, his energy depleted, collapsed onto the bed, his mind still reeling from the events of the night. Sarah, unable to shake off the feeling of being watched, moved restlessly around the room, checking locks, peering out of windows, her every sense on high alert. The room, despite its modern amenities and bland decor, offered little solace. The air conditioner hummed a constant low drone, a mechanical heartbeat that did little to drown out the echoes of fear that reverberated through Sarah's mind. She showered, the hot water stinging her skin, but it did nothing to wash away the feeling of unseen eyes on her, the phantom touch of icy fingers on her neck. She lay down next to John, his steady breathing a counterpoint to the chaos of her thoughts. He reached for her, his arm encircling her waist, his touch a grounding force in a world that had tilted on its axis. She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep, to escape the terror that clung to her like a second skin. But sleep, when it finally came, was a restless, dream-ridden affair, populated by shadowy figures and whispers of ancient evils. The following morning, the sunlight streaming through the gap in the curtains seemed almost alien in its normalcy. John, his pragmatic nature reasserting itself, tried to rationalize the events of the previous night. Jet lag, a dodgy meal, a shared case of vivid imaginations, anything to explain away the terror that had gripped them. Sarah, however, remained unconvinced. The fear lingered, a cold knot in her stomach, a constant reminder that their ordeal was far from over. They ventured out cautiously. The bustling streets of Chiang Mai a stark contrast to the deserted alleyways of their nightmare. The city, bathed in the warm glow of the morning sun, seemed almost oblivious to the darkness that lurked beneath its vibrant surface. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following their every move. The whispers seemed to emanate from the ancient walls themselves, from the shadows that stretched long and thin beneath the midday sun. They tried to lose themselves in the familiar rhythms of tourist life, visiting temples, haggling over souvenirs, seeking solace in the company of other travelers. But the fear was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to them, a reminder that their escape was merely an illusion. They were still in its domain, still trapped in its web of terror. They returned to the hotel as dusk began to paint the sky in hues of purple and orange, the city holding its breath as it prepared for the coming night. John, desperate to break the cycle of fear, suggested dinner at the hotel restaurant, a bland, brightly lit space that promised safety in its anonymity. But Sarah, drawn by a force she couldn't quite comprehend, insisted they seek out Chai. They needed answers, guidance, perhaps even protection, and she knew with a certainty that defied logic that he was the only one who could help them. They found Chai at the family-run restaurant, his presence a beacon of calm amidst the growing storm of their fear. He listened patiently as they recounted the events of the previous night, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of concern and a deep, knowing sadness. When they finished, a heavy silence descended upon the table, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of chopsticks and the murmur of conversation from the other diners. "You should not have run," Chai said finally, his voice low and grave. "The Kuman Thong feeds on fear, but it also feeds on attachment. By fleeing, you have only strengthened its hold on you." John, his patience wearing thin, slammed his hand on the table, rattling the plates. "This is madness," he exclaimed, his voice echoing through the small restaurant. "We're talking about a child's toy, an amulet. It's just superstition." Chai sighed, his gaze filled with a wisdom that transcended John's skepticism. "The Kuman Thong is real," he said, his voice firm. "And it is not to be trifled with. You have disturbed something ancient and powerful, something that will not rest until it is appeased." He reached into his robes and produced a small, worn book, its pages filled with intricate script and strange symbols. "There is a way," he said, his voice a low murmur, "a ritual performed by a monk skilled in the ways of the spirit world. But it is dangerous, and there is no guarantee of success." He looked at them, his gaze steady, his face etched with a grave responsibility. "You must decide," he said, his voice barely audible above the clatter of the restaurant. "Will you face your fear, or will you let it consume you?" John, his rational mind struggling to comprehend the situation, wanted to dismiss Chai's words as the ramblings of a superstitious culture. But Sarah, her intuition screaming at her, knew in her heart that he spoke the truth. They had stumbled into a realm where the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, where ancient evils walked among the living, and there was no turning back. They spent the rest of the evening with Chai, listening to his stories of Thai folklore, his tales of spirits and demons, of ancient rituals and forgotten gods. He spoke of the delicate balance between the human world and the unseen realm, of the respect that must be paid to the forces that govern both. He told them of the Kuman Thong, not as a malevolent entity, but as a lost soul, trapped between worlds, yearning for peace. He explained that the ritual, if performed correctly, would not banish the spirit but appease it, offering it solace and release. As the night deepened and the city outside settled into an uneasy slumber, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm descend upon her. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer a paralyzing terror, but a quiet understanding of the forces at play, a respect for the ancient power they had unwittingly disturbed. John, despite his skepticism, was moved by Chai's conviction, by the depth of his belief. He saw the fear in Sarah's eyes, but he also saw a newfound determination, a willingness to face the darkness head-on. He knew with a certainty that transcended logic and reason that they were in this together, and they would face whatever lay ahead, side by side. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, they made their decision. They would perform the ritual. They would face their fear, and they would offer the Kuman Thong the peace it craved. It was a risky proposition, a gamble with forces they barely understood. But as they looked into each other's eyes, they knew they had no other choice. They had opened a door into the darkness, and now they had to find a way to close it. Chai had warned them that finding a monk willing to perform the ritual would be no easy task. Many would refuse, fearing the wrath of a disturbed Kuman Thong. Others might exploit their desperation, demanding exorbitant sums for their services. They spent the day traversing the city, their steps guided by Chai's whispered instructions, their hearts heavy with apprehension. The humid air hung thick with the scent of incense and spices, the vibrant colours of the marketplace a stark contrast to the growing darkness within them. They visited ancient temples, their ornate facades a testament to a faith that felt both alluring and honestly a bit terrifying. They spoke to wizened monks, their eyes filled with ancient wisdom, but their words offered little comfort. Many shook their heads, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and fear. Others listened patiently, only to dismiss their story as the ramblings of tourists addled by the tropical heat. As the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the ancient city, their hope dwindled with the fading light. They returned to the hotel, exhaustion and despair weighing heavy on their souls. John, his pragmatic nature struggling to reconcile with the situation, paced the small room, his frustration growing with each passing moment. "This is hopeless," he muttered, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "We're chasing shadows, letting ourselves be led on a wild goose chase by a superstitious old man." Sarah, though equally disheartened, clung to a sliver of hope. She had seen the fear in Chai's eyes, felt the weight of truth in his words. She knew with a certainty that defied logic that they couldn't ignore this, couldn't simply turn their backs on the darkness they had unleashed. Just as despair threatened to engulf them, a soft knock on the door sent a jolt of adrenaline through them. It was Chai, his face etched with a mixture of relief and urgency. He held out a small folded piece of paper, his hand trembling slightly. "I've found him," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "A monk living in a remote temple outside the city. He's old, very old, but he is said to possess great power, a deep understanding of the spirit world." The journey to the temple was a blur of winding roads, dense jungle, and the ever-present feeling of unseen eyes watching their every move. As darkness descended, the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and unfamiliar flowers, The only sounds the chirping of insects and the distant calls of nocturnal birds. Sarah, her senses heightened by fear and anticipation, felt a growing sense of unease, a primal instinct that warned of danger lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. Chai, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights, remained silent throughout the journey, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his lips moving in silent prayer. John, his skepticism battling with a growing sense of foreboding, gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white with tension. The Land Rover, its headlights cutting through the darkness, lurched and swayed along the potholed track, the engine straining against the incline. They finally arrived at the temple as the moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, eerie shadows across the ancient stonework. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense and decay, a palpable silence pressing down on them like a physical weight. The temple, its once grand facade crumbling with age and neglect, seemed to emanate a sense of ancient power, a place where the veil between worlds thinned to a whisper. Chai led them through a crumbling archway, his footsteps echoing on the worn flagstones, and into a courtyard overgrown with weeds and vines. A solitary oil lamp flickered near the entrance to the main temple building, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the weathered stonework. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a tangible sense of something ancient and watchful, lurking just beyond the periphery of their vision. As they approached the flickering lamplight, a figure emerged from the shadows. He was old, impossibly old, his wrinkled face a roadmap of time and hardship, his eyes burning with an inner light that belied his frail frame. He wore simple saffron robes, his head shaved, a string of wooden beads, the only adornment on his frail body. He regarded them with a gaze that seemed to pierce through their very souls, his silence speaking volumes in the stillness of the night. The monk, his voice a raspy whisper that seemed to emanate from the depths of the earth, spoke in hushed tones to Chai, his words too low and guttural for Sarah or John to decipher. Chai translated, his own voice barely a murmur, his face pale with apprehension. "He knows why you're here," Chai whispered, his eyes darting nervously between the monk and the shadows that danced at the edge of the lamplight. "He has sensed the presence of the Kuman Thong, feels its disturbance." The monk, his gaze fixed on Sarah, extended a gnarled hand, his fingers beckoning her forward. She hesitated, a shiver of fear running down her spine, but the monk's gaze held her captive, drawing her in with an irresistible force. She took a step, then another, her hand reaching out to John's, seeking reassurance in his touch. He squeezed her hand, his own apprehension overshadowed by a desire to protect her, to shield her from the unseen forces that seemed to press in from all sides. The monk led them inside the temple, the air thick with the scent of incense and something ancient and unnameable. The interior was dark, lit only by flickering oil lamps that cast grotesque shadows on the walls, illuminating murals depicting scenes of both sublime beauty and terrifying violence. The monk gestured for them to sit on cushions arranged on the floor before a small altar adorned with offerings of fruit, flowers and incense. He began to chant, his voice a low, rhythmic drone that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. The chanting grew in intensity, the words washing over Sarah like waves, pulling her under, dragging her deeper into the heart of the temple, into the heart of the unseen world. She felt a presence, cold and watchful, lurking at the edge of her perception, its gaze fixed on her, hungry, demanding. The monk's chanting reached a crescendo, the air crackling with an unseen energy, the shadows on the walls twisting and writhing as if alive. The temperature in the temple plummeted, a sudden chill that cut through Sarah's clothes, chilling her to the bone. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. John's hand tightened on hers, his presence a small island of warmth in the encroaching darkness. And then she saw it. A faint glow emanating from the center of the altar, a pulsating light that grew in intensity with each passing moment. The glow resolved itself into a form, small and misshapen, its features indistinct in the flickering lamplight. The air grew thick with a palpable sense of malevolence, a suffocating presence that pressed down on them, stealing their breath, their hope, their sanity. The Kuman Thong had awakened. The monk's chanting faltered, his voice cracking with effort as he struggled to maintain control over the growing power of the Kuman Thong. The air crackled with unseen energy, the temperature in the temple fluctuating wildly between stifling heat and bone-chilling cold. The shadows on the walls writhed and pulsed, taking on grotesque shapes that seemed to mock their terror. John, his skepticism shattered by the undeniable evidence of his own senses, gripped Sarah's hand, his knuckles white with tension. He wanted to run, to flee the suffocating darkness of the temple, to escape the unseen forces that threatened to engulf them. But something held him rooted to the spot, a mixture of fear and a strange, compelling fascination. The Kuman Thong, its form solidifying with each passing moment, hovered above the altar, its glow casting an eerie light on the monk's sweating face. Its features, though still indistinct, were undeniably grotesque, a horrifying parody of a child's face, twisted into a mask of rage and despair. Sarah could feel its gaze on her, cold and calculating, filled with an ancient hunger that chilled her to the core. The monk, his voice a strained whisper, turned to Sarah, his eyes pleading for understanding. "The spirit is restless," he rasped, his words translated by Chai's trembling voice. "It demands to be heard, to have its story told." He looked from Sarah to John, his gaze filled with a wisdom born of countless years spent navigating the treacherous waters of the spirit world. "You have a choice to make," he said, his voice barely audible above the crackling energy that filled the temple. "Will you listen to the spirit's tale, offer it the peace it craves, or will you turn away, condemn it to an eternity of restless torment?" The weight of the decision pressed down on them, heavy as the suffocating air, inescapable as the spirit's watchful gaze. Their hearts pounded in their chests, their breaths echoing in the oppressive silence. The fate of the Kuman Thong, their own fate, hung in the balance, a fragile thread stretched taut between the realms of the living and the dead. The air crackled, thick with the stench of decay and dread. The Kuman Thong's presence, a palpable weight, pressed down on them. Sarah felt a scream rise in her throat, a primal scream of terror and defiance. But before she could utter a sound, John, his face pale but resolute, stepped forward. "We'll listen," he said, his voice surprisingly steady in the suffocating silence. The words seemed to hang in the air, a challenge to the unseen forces that held them captive. The monk, his face etched with a mixture of relief and apprehension, nodded slowly. He began to chant again, his voice low and rhythmic, a soothing counterpoint to the crackling energy that filled the temple. The Kuman Thong, its grotesque form flickering in the lamplight, turned its baleful gaze on John. Sarah felt a surge of protectiveness towards him, a desperate urge to shield him from the spirit's wrath. But John stood his ground, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the glowing entity before him. The monk's chanting grew in intensity, the air shimmering around them, the shadows on the walls twisting and contorting as if alive. The Kuman Thong, its form solidifying, its features becoming clearer in the flickering lamplight, began to speak. Its voice, a child's voice, high-pitched and filled with an ancient sorrow, sent shivers down Sarah's spine. It spoke of betrayal, of a life cut short, of a soul trapped between worlds, yearning for release. It spoke of anger, of a thirst for vengeance, of a hunger that could never be satisfied. It spoke of loneliness, of a longing for love, of a desperate need to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be remembered. As the spirit's tale unfolded, Sarah felt a strange empathy wash over her, a deep sadness for the lost soul trapped in this grotesque form. She realized that the Kuman Thong was not inherently evil, but a victim of circumstance, a creature driven to extremes by grief, anger, and despair. The ritual lasted for what felt like an eternity, the air thick with incense, sweat, and the weight of unspoken emotions. The monks chanting, a constant undercurrent to the spirit's tale, seemed to weave a protective barrier around them, holding the darkness at bay. When the Kuman Thong finally fell silent, its glow fading, its form dissolving back into the shadows, a profound silence descended upon the temple. The air, no longer crackling with energy, felt heavy, still, as if the very atmosphere were catching its breath. The monk, his face pale with exhaustion, slumped back against the altar, his chest heaving with the effort. John, his face etched with the emotional toll of the experience, reached for Sarah's hand, his grip tight, reassuring. They stumbled out of the temple into the cool pre-dawn air, the first rays of sunlight piercing the darkness like shards of hope. As they made their way back to the Land Rover, guided by Chai's silent presence, Sarah felt a strange lightness, a sense of relief mingled with a lingering dread. They had survived the night, had faced their fears and emerged, changed from the encounter. The Kuman Thong was at peace, its story told, its soul released from its earthly tether. But as they drove away from the temple, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them, something unseen, intangible, yet undeniably present. The feeling persisted long after they had left Thailand, a shadow lurking at the edge of their perception, a whisper in the stillness of the night. They tried to move on, to forget the horrors they had witnessed, but the experience had left an indelible mark on their souls, a chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. And sometimes, in the quiet hours, when the shadows stretched long and thin, Sarah could almost feel the phantom touch of unseen hands on her skin, a chilling reminder that some things, once unleashed, can never be truly contained. Have you ever experienced something like this? We post new, true horror stories every single week here on Stories from the Dark. So if you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And if you've lived through something strange, tell us in the comments. We might share it next. Subscribe to the True Asian Horror Story series, where we bring stories that rise from the East and fall into darkness in the West. Don't miss the next story that might haunt your dreams.